might remember a few years ago we competed in endurance racing with Suzuki. We could have ridden the GSX-R 1000 superbike and perhaps even collected some silverware, but we are old and grumpy, so we asked instead for the GSX-S 1000F, the comfy couch that could also sort of go around corners and wasn't bad down the straights. We won almost nothing, but saved thousands on chiropractor bills. And there was only one fire. Now, there is a new model of the F, more trendily called the GT, and it looks like something that spent time in a nuclear reactor and emerged as a quasi-demonic fighter for justice, except long distance. So obviously this specific bike has come with a whole lot of touring accessories, like this big screen and all this luggage, this boot space. And I like boot space, especially for us hardcore touring bikers. You can keep such things as, in this tank bag, you've got bog roll, 3-ply bog roll. Because although we're hardcore bikers, I mean, 3-ply, come on. And then we move around to the panniers. Now in here, it's all very vitally important. When it opens, here we have, now as every hardcore biker knows, it didn't happen unless it goes on Facebook. And of course you need all of this to keep your cell phone running and connected to the internet for the entirety of your journey. This is vitally important. Then of course there's the clothing requirements, which is, of course in motorcycling is extremely important, which is why I have packed the essentials. Yeah, basically it's just underwear. This is my prison underwear for in case I get arrested. Gentlemen, as you all know, you wear it forwards, backwards, inside out forward, inside out backwards, set on fire, repeat. Of course, these provisions should see the hardcore biker through months of travel and set everyone back a fee of 279,000 Rand. But should you not wish to be on the road that long and would prefer a heavier wallet instead, you could buy the version without any boot space for 249,000 Rand. With that, you can carry a single toothbrush, and that should comfortably see you through at least a week of touring goodness. And more so, this little tank bed acts as a pillow. You can sleep. Unfortunately, that's sleeping on the job, so Matt said no. With provisions out of the way, we move on to performance. The GT steams around, powered by a 150 horsepower motor from 2005. The 4-cylinder 999cc motor that started life in the K5 GSX-R 1000. Although, over the past 2 decades, it has seen a host of upgrades, allowing it to carry on without protest from the nanny Euro 5 enforcers, and some improvements for the hardcore touring biker. The big difference between this bike and the one that we raced is this throttle. That thing was a little bit of an on-off switch. This thing is so utterly smooth. Now, 150 horsepower is not the most amount of power. It's not a little, but it's not like shattering physics. But the way they've sort of made it to sort of compete with the twins and other kind of firing orders is giving this bike huge amounts of mid-range. And that's very good because it makes the bike very easy to ride. You don't need to do so much footwork to get the 4-cylinder motor to work properly, to build properly in any gear. Just stick it in top gear, it's fine, it'll stay there, smooth as can be. The only issue is that when you open the throttle and you want to kind of feel that acceleration of forward motion, the forward motion comes, but it happens in such a way that it doesn't exactly want to wring your arms out of your sockets. It's kind of this very sort of smooth effect, and it's sort of, dare I say, I wish it were a little bit rougher so you could actually feel it a little bit better. That's the worst complaint on the world ever. And they've steadily increased the amount of technology too. I quite like this dash. It's sort of usable, but it has this kind of rugged manliness. It also says on the top here, SDMS, which obviously stands for Suzuki Dynamic Motorcycle something or other, but it's very important. Yeah. Beyond this vital piece of tech, the GT also sports 3 rider modes with ABS and traction control, a cruise control, and cell phone connectivity, all controlled via the dash. The buttons, it's got this very fiddly sort of directional buttons. It's a bit like something you find in an old school Nokia. It works, but you kind of need to look where you're going when you push them. You can't just sort of feel your way around them. They are a little bit small and fiddly, but they work okay. At 226 kilograms wet, it is among the lightest of the unlimited sport tours, helping the sport aspect somewhat. The handling is decent. I mean, it's one of these sort of things where you kind of don't expect this bike to be able to tip in the corners effortlessly. And it's not exactly completely effortless, but it's a lot better than you'd think it would. This specific bike is set up, I think, a little bit soft. I suspect somebody took the preload knob and turned it all the way out, because it's ridiculously comfortable, but a little bit wallowy through corners. But I think turn the knob on the rear shock in a little bit, and that's fine. It's gone. The seating position is magnificent. It's maybe a little cramped on your legs, so taller people are going to struggle with that. The screen is not adjustable, but quite frankly, it's in the position you would have eventually adjusted it to had you had adjustable screen. But so it's sort of one of those mute points. Just like everything, you get a million options, and then after you've had the bike for a while, you kind of leave it at one of them, and that just sort of stays there. Overall, the GT does everything it says on the box. It can cruise all day or rock your socks off when it's time to go full throttle. But then, most European sports tours or semi-adventure bikes can do exactly the same and possibly better, although none of them can do it for the price of the GT. To find competition in that regard, we'll need to look at the GT's compatriot, a bike we had on the show not too long ago, the Kawasaki Ninja 1000 SX. The big question is, of course, which is better, and the answer is, I don't really know. I rode the SX and I loved it. I'm riding this and I'm loving it, and I'm just struggling to figure out which one I like more. This one has sort of more unique looks, although it's a little bit Marmite. Some people say they love it, some people don't. It is very distinctive. The power feels very similar to the SX. The technology is quite similar. A few things missing, but it's quite similar. Same sort of brakes, same sort of suspension, same sort of everything. I'm guessing the only way I'm going to have to figure out which is better is to get both of them and ride them at the same time. Yeah, I think that's a very good idea. Yeah, I need to do that. I'm going to do that. I'm definitely going to do that.
Yeah, undoubtedly difficult to choose between two very similarly matched bikes in the shape of the Kawasaki and the Suzuki, given they're using almost identical ingredients. Hopefully Don will be able to get that head-to-head test sorted and then find the time to delve into the details of the bikes and their features in a bit more depth than he has done with this GT. I've really been looking forward to getting a go on this bike, so I booked myself a demo ride at my local dealer, but unfortunately my half-hour ride, which accidentally stretched to an hour, meant I couldn't get the cameras out. But here's my take on the standout things I noticed that Don perhaps hasn't focused on or hasn't even mentioned at all. Now, bear in mind that my observations come from barely 100 kilometers, not even of riding, so I will reserve final judgment and say they're subject to some refinement at a future date. But one of the first things that leapt out at me was the quick shifter, which, by the way, is both ways and comes as standard. Fantastic, even at lower speeds. I have to say that over the past 30 years or so of testing, you can generally pretty much rely on Suzuki giving you a seriously smooth gearbox, even long before the arrival of these quick shifters, and it's very much par for the course here. Most of these systems do a great job at higher RPM. This is, after all, a development that has come from the world of racing, and it's obviously easier to get the system bang on when the revs are high and the throttle is pretty much full on. By the same token, for road use and in less than flat out scenarios, it's more problematic to find a solution. So, for instance, a quarter throttle or constant throttle in a middling gear in town at low speeds. These things can often be horribly clunky. Although if they are, it's easy just to take over manually and finesse the gear changes the old-fashioned way, and there's nothing wrong with that. I've had a few comments sent my way that we shouldn't use them at all at lower speeds. They're not designed for these scenarios, so they say, but as far as I'm concerned, if you put the system there on a sport tourer or a naked bike like my MT-09, where there's a very high likelihood of them being used at sensible speeds in sensible urban conditions, then you should expect them to be used. Some work pretty well, my MT-09 included, and you can now add Suzuki's GT to that list. It's not perfect all of the time, but it does more than a good enough job that I wasn't automatically taking over myself when just bimbling through town. The brakes, I think they're also excellent, which is no surprise given they are in fact monoblock Brembo calipers up front. The last GT I rode was KTM's 1290 Super Duke GT, which is obviously in a different, much higher price bracket, but it's trying to do the same job in a similar sort of way. Anyway, the Brembos on that are top-notch superbike calipers. These are a bit lower down the Brembo pecking order, but still very good. Not as much initial bite as with the Stylemas, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, as is the extra finger pressure that's needed to generate the required braking force. But overall, the power's pretty much still there. The KYB suspension is fully adjustable up front, but there's only preload and rebound adjustment on the rear. For most riders, this will be enough, and in the standard setting, it does generate a very compliant ride quality, which is what you want on a bike designed to do some touring. The other side of that equation is that when you do start going a bit banzai, then the bike starts moving around quite noticeably. I rather like the movement. It doesn't ever threaten to get out of control in any way, but rather acts like a kind of soft limiter on your shenanigans. And it makes me feel fast and puts a grin on my face, which is always a top result as far as I'm concerned. The decent range of adjustability means you'll be able to dial much of that out if you want, but irritatingly, on what is a big, otherwise pretty well-equipped sport tourer, if you want to dial some preload on the rear shock in, or out, depending on whether you've got a passenger or some luggage to deal with, then the least that you should expect is a handily placed remote preload adjuster. I mean, this is, after all, the bit of the bike suspension that we all play with most frequently, for the reasons I've just mentioned. But Suzuki hasn't bothered with that, so you have to fish out the C-spanner from the toolkit and fit the little extension bar and then dislocate your wrist trying to make an adjustment. It's so unpleasant an experience, you'll find what you hope is a happy medium and then never touch it again. And that's an unfortunate oversight on a sport touring model. And while we're on the subject of unfortunate touring oversights, where's the centre stand? Not a standard fit? That's a shame. I'll just tick the options box then. No optional extra either? That sucks a bit for oiling and adjusting your chain, don't you think? Another gripe I have is comfort, not for the rider, which seems good, but like I said, I only rode it for an hour or so, but for the passenger. My admittedly tall wife didn't like the small surface area of the seat, and no, darling, I'm not saying you've got a big bottom. It's a small seat, and the pegs are quite high, but the grab rails are good. No heated grips as well as standard, which seems a bit cheap, but at least they're an option. Right, enough of the niggly moaning. The TFT screen is excellent, a real step up for Suzuki, and how well it integrates with your phone via Suzuki's dedicated riding app is also very good. You can even get some sat-nav maps thrown on there via the Bluetooth connection. The engine is, as you would expect, given its heritage that Suzuki so proudly boasts about, smooth and punchy, and if you're prepared to work it a bit, it's properly, seriously sport bike fast with 150 horsepower on tap. The K5 GSX-R 1000 engine from which it is derived may well be, what, not far off 2 decades old now, but don't let that put you off. It's the ultimate case of if it ain't broke, just refine it. It's more powerful than its Kawasaki competition, and I'd venture probably a touch smoother as well. At first glance, all the electronic goodies you'd expect are present and correct, with 3 rider modes, 5-way adjustable traction control and an easy start system so you don't have to pull the clutch in if it's in neutral when you start it up. There's cruise control, and there's a low RPM assist that helps you pull away from standstill by bumping up the revs a touch, which might be useful when you're fully loaded and tired and not paying too much attention after a full day's riding. What is a bit of a surprise, and it's not a deal breaker, but it does put it one step behind the likes of Yamaha's Tracer GT and Kawasaki's Ninja SX, and further up the price scale you've got BMW's R1250 RS and the KTM Super Duke GT. And that's the fact that the traction control and the ABS and any other electronic safety aids aren't lean angle sensitive. In other words, there's no multi-axis IMU helping refine how all those electronic systems work, which to me does seem a bit strange in 2022. Okay, time to stop waffling. Apologies for the longer than usual test. I'll just end up by saying I need to spend more time with the Suzuki, as does Don, to work out where it stands in our pecking order of sport tourers. I'll just end by saying I enjoyed my time with it. There's a whole load to really like about what is in many respects a comfortable, soft-edge superbike for the road, not least in my admittedly questionable opinion, the distinctive looks that really do it for me. And of course that engine that just ages ever so tastefully like a fine, powerful red wine. Right, after the break, some news of Hero on the roof.